How we doing? I think we got audio and we are live. Swami Streams, another episode, and I'm telling you, another chaotic day. My tagline holds true: coding, fun, and a little bit of chaos. And so this morning when I came on, or right now, I had some problems with OBS. It wasn't connected to Restream. Oh my gosh! But I am live. A couple minutes late, and I apologize for keeping you waiting, but I am here. And today on the show, going to be talking about, we're going to write some code, and we're going to write some unit tests. And we're going to be writing some unit tests for some more complicated scenarios than we had in the past. So I think that's going to be cool for people that are having trouble or writing unit tests. If you're not familiar with how to do it, how to write unit tests, mocking dependencies. And that is what we're going to get into. Now, I am running a minute behind, so let me get myself set up over here. What is all this stuff? Wait, oh my God. Oh, I see what's going on. I don't want this window in here. Oh my gosh, what is that? Oh God, all kinds of chaos going on. You know what? I'll just leave it the way it is. It's just fine. So, how's everybody doing? Thanks for joining me here on the stream. I'm just checking around a little bit as I'm about to start writing some code. Don't want to wait too long. And unmute. Is that today? Am I muted? I don't think I'm muted. I shouldn't be muted. Hopefully there's audio going on. So hopefully the audio works. And I'm going to find out in a second. Let's try something. I got to try something real quick. Audio's okay. Who said that? ContriveDex. ContriveDex, thank you. Thanks for giving me a heads up that the audio is okay, because that is always like I've started the show without audio in the past, and that's been a bit of a glitch. But let's see. So, without further ado, I'm going to open up my solution here, and then I'll switch over and show the code view. Let's do that anyway. Let's go to me, and that should show my Visual Studio starting up. And okay, this is where I take a deep breath, Andy, so we can write some code together. So we're going to write some code, and let's take a look at this and write some unit tests is really what we're going to be focusing on today. And a quick overview of what we're working on here. I've got a solution in Visual Studio, and I've got this code in here, and I'm using the Orchestrator pattern. Again, I feel like each show I have to go a little bit back and explain what's going on just to set it up. So I've got this, what I call an orchestrator. You can call it something different if you'd like, with a method called getHistory. And it's going to get an episode list of history of the episodes of the show. And so first thing it does is it validates these criteria that come in. Then it gets the episodes. Then it converts the episodes into like a DTO so we can send that back out to the client, et cetera, et cetera. Really simple example, but I think this is pretty reasonable to what some real code would look like. And you'll see that the getHistory validator is up here in mini validators, and we have this getHistory DTO validator. And down on the unit tests project, we already have, let's see, here's some tests. I already have tests for this class. So I've already got tests for this, right? Is the code in GitHub? The code is the code in GitHub. The code is in GitHub. Yeah. Let's take a look. SpaceShot is asking if the code is in GitHub. And I believe it is. Let me get github.com. Then I'll go in here. And Swami, I think it's this stream website. Let's take a look. This should be it. Backend test 7 days ago. This is the code. So I'll paste the link in here. And you can take a look at the code. and that should be public certainly for read. And yeah, so you can take a look at the code right there and play along at home, I guess, if you want. So what I was saying is that this code is tested. This validator we know works, right? And I think I tested this converter. I probably haven't tested this data service yet, but that's not the point. The point is, how do we test the interaction of all these different pieces together? And I don't like to necessarily say this is an integration test. There's a bit of a gray area here. I'm still doing unit testing, but I want a unit test that all of my other small units are getting called correctly. And since I've got these things all passed in to my class as dependencies, it gets to be pretty easy to test. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mocking library to help me mock out these things and help me write unit tests. Now, the library I choose to use is going to be, let's see, backend tests. I'm going to go to manage NuGet. There it is. I use a library called mock, M-O-Q. Some people pronounce it mock-Q, which I'll be honest, I don't think is correct, although I'm not really sure. I use a library called mock, which I find works really nicely. The bigger point here is it kind of doesn't matter which library you use. Oh, uninstall. Do I have it installed already? I didn't notice it was installed already. Oh, I already have it installed. I've already installed mock, so that's easy. What I was going to say is it doesn't matter if you use mock or Ninject. Is Ninject one of them? Yeah. There's a bunch of these different libraries, and I'm curious to know what you like that you might use. We could take a look over here and say like .NET mocking frameworks. Let's see what kind of choices we have here. N substitute, never heard of that. Let's see. Mock, C#, let's see. What is a mocking framework? These don't really look like the list. Well, this is one that gives a list of different ones, possibly. Wasn't really prepared, but I thought it might be fun to take a look at lists of mocks. Space Shot says he struggles with mocking. So Space Shot, let me just say, the problem is you're lame. No, I'm mocking you, right? I could say I don't like the shirt you're wearing. That's my bad mocking joke, but I don't know if that goes over really well on the stream. So I won't mock you for not being good at mocking. But it says I've seen some tests that really work awfully hard to mock what you might read from a service or file, and I wonder what it is really testing. Yeah. So we're going to get right to the point. So the way I do these things, the way I look at it is, and I'll even write some comments in here and talk about like what we would want to test, right? What do we want to test? So we know that this validator works, right? So what I want to find out is, does the validator get called, right? Does the validator get the right args, right? So does this get history DTO get passed into here? What I'm testing is, and I call these orchestrators, and what I'm testing is the orchestration. Is this method doing its job? Its job is to orchestrate and call different things. And so then I might say, well, if results, and we'll translate these into unit tests in a minute, right? But if the results of validation fail, does it return success equals false, right? Those are the kind of things. I'm putting a semicolon here because it's the end of a line. How funny is that? That's C# instinct for you. So does this validator get called and does it pass? And then I'm going to continue to test the control sort of flow of this thing. So does get episodes, I have trouble typing that word, get called, right? Same kind of thing. Does this get called, right? Then in the case of this for each loop, does the get history converter get called for each time I loop through this thing and pass the right results into it. Things like that. These are the kind of things I want to test. Now, you might look at this and say, well, it seems kind of obvious that this is going to get called. I can see the code right here. I can see the code, and it's going to happen, right? Well, sure, it's going to happen. Just like some of the examples we have, the code is fairly simple, and so we can read it and kind of get a good idea that it's going to work. But what we're doing is we're making sure, like, what happens if I had something like with a knot in here, right? And like that got removed by mistake or whatever. And I really just want to make sure that I have things correct here. I want to make sure that if another developer comes in here, they don't break the logic. And so what I was saying last week on the show, I find that unit tests are a really good indicator of what the developer expects to happen, right? And so what I mean by that is it's great to have these tests that are going to give me a safety net when we make changes. It's great to know that these tests are going to work. I could go write some other code and put something in here, and by mistake, I might break the control flow, and maybe this validator is not getting called before the episode's data service or something like that. So I could break the flow of that. So the unit tests will continue to show the developers what my original intentions were if they make changes and they take this out for whatever reason. Maybe they did it on purpose, maybe they didn't do it on purpose, but they took that out. My now tests on this orchestrator are going to fail. And that's a second reminder to that developer that says, whoa, that new developer that comes in later, whoa, there's a test here that I broke. Now, maybe I meant to. Maybe we're not doing this validation anymore and I can remove that test. Or maybe as a new developer, I did something wrong and broke what Andy was trying to accomplish in the first place. So sort of the purpose behind why we're testing these things. And now let's get into actually writing a test on this thing and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go over to my test project here. And I have mini. And so I'm going to add a new folder in here. Again, I just like to organize things in lots of folders. And you could do this or not do this. The other day, I was watching Bob Ross paint on TV. You guys ever watch Bob Ross? Bob Ross is awesome. This guy just paints these beautiful pictures, and he does it so simply. And he says these funny little phrases in here. And I felt like compelled, like I should be like, let's add a happy little orchestrator folder. Yeah, I'll talk real soft like Bob Ross. Yeah, let's add, maybe in my world, we call these orchestrators. And we're just going to add a nice, happy little orchestrator folder. That's what Bob Ross would do. And if you don't know who Bob Ross is, Google Bob Ross and watch him paint. The dude's awesome. All right, so we've got orchestrator, and I'm going to add in another class in here. And I'm going to call it the episode. No, this is not what I'm going to do. In here, I'm going to add another folder. And I'm going to call it episode history orchestrator. Okay, spelling is hard for me. And so now I've got a folder to match, just like they did before, a folder for this particular class. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to test this get history. So I'm going to create a class called get history tests. And I'm thinking about changing the way I do some of this stuff. And so probably in another episode, I'm going to attempt to revisit some of this. But anyway, let's get into this. And so what I can do now is let's actually take these notes. These notes were pretty helpful. I'm just going to grab this out of here. There it goes. Okay, my computer's a little slow, obviously. And let's just put this in up here because it'll just be helpful. So what do we want to test? We want to test, does the validator get called? So I'm going to write my first test, and I'm going to say public void. So this is the way I typically do this. Calls validate, calls, what's this thing called? Let's be explicit here. Calls the get history DTO validator. I'll even copy that out of here. So naming is really important. Calls get history DTO validator. Okay, let's just start with that for now. Naming is important, and if we get the name right, then we can really limit our unit test and get to exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to say this is a fact, which is what XUnit calls these things. We talked about that last week. Now, I think what I'm going to do in a future episode is change the naming of these things. I've sort of been looking at one of the guys at work, was kind of turned me on. I'd seen this years ago, but hadn't seen it in a while. One of the guys at work turned me on to this when, sort of then, or even given when then sort of naming convention. And so I might name this this test sort of like when checking history, then calls get history validator, or something like that. I don't know, but that's not what we're talking about. So what we want to do is we want to test this thing. So I'm going to create an instance of my episode history orchestrator, and I'm going to call it SUT for system under test. That's the thing we're trying to test right now. Equals new episode history orchestrator. This is what I want to test. Okay, and let's just get rid of that because I hate this kind of long naming things, and let's just add this to, come on. Why won't it? Because of the folder. Yeah. Why? Maybe that's not. I should have called this folder tests. Let's rename this folder. Rename this folder tests. So I'm getting a naming conflict. Okay. Tests. Sorry, let's get that right here. Okay, so if I do that, I don't want to go in there. If I do that, that'll sort of help that should help the naming of this thing go from tests. And then it should realize that I'm not in the same class and I want to use my orchestrator. So, okay, fine. Now, the problem I'm going to have right off the bat is that this orchestrator expects some things to do its business. It's going to expect these three classes. I'm just going to grab these and throw them in there just so we have something to look at. It'll probably just help me remember. So let's throw those up there for now and say that what I want to do, I need those three things. So what I'm going to create is a mock of each one of those. Mock, and I'm going to say I want a mock get history validator. Oh, that was weird. Space coming in there. Let's see, I need to add a reference to validators and mock. Okay, great. So I'm going to create one of these things. I'm going to say this is going to be called the get. I'm going to copy and paste because it's always easier. Get history DTO validator equals new mock. Did I put my semicolon? Let's get rid of that thing here. Okay, so I've got that one. And actually, I'll just kind of paste this in a couple times and say that. Oh, you know what? That, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. Isn't that fun watching me cut and paste? But it's probably better than watching me type. And I need to add some. So this is sort of this just setup part that you need to have these things in order to create the orchestrator, right? I can't test the orchestrator if I don't have its dependencies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass these in. Now, different frameworks work differently. The way mock, MOQ framework works is that if I try to pass in just that, it knows that's a mock. It's not really a get history DTO validator that this class expects. So what I do is I say dot object. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for all of these. As a matter of fact, let's do it this way. And so let's say we want to pass in the episode history converter dot object. And hopefully I have these in the right order. Episode, oh, that's the wrong one. But now I want to pass in the episode data service dot object. And if I do that and they're in the right order, then this is going to work. And let's see what it says. Does not contain a constructor takes 4 arguments. It's because I have a comma here on the end. Let's do that. And so now this thing will work, right? And so if I was to go in here next and say sut dot get history is the method we're calling, and I pass in some sort of new get history DTO, this theoretically, would try to work. It would try to do something. And so we'll get in here. We'll fix this stuff in a bit. I hate having those namespaces in there. So now we want to think, so what are we trying to test? We're trying to see, does it call the get history DTO validator? Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the mock framework, MOQ, has some methods. So what I want to do is I want to say on my get history DTO validator, where is it? It's odd. Okay, let's just do that. And we're going to say verify. Verify are the methods you use to check that a dependency has been called. So what I want to do is I want to say V for validator. And now I can choose like which method on my validator do I want to know that gets called. Now it only has one. Well, it has a few others, but in this case, it only has one that I care about, which is validate. I want to know that validate gets called, okay? And I want to make sure that it gets called one time. So let's put that in there next. That's kind of times once, right? So there's a nice little helper method in there, helper object or enum struct, actually it's called, a struct. Called times, and I want to know that it's been called once. I can see if it was called never, or I can see that it was called exactly 3 times if I wanted to, but essentially I just want to try that it was called once. Okay. And of course, I'm getting some squigglies here because validate certainly takes a criteria, and it takes a criteria that is this thing, this new get history DTO. Now let's take this out and let's move this up to here and say var DTO equals that. Okay, let's pass it in here. So my test says calls get history DTO validator, and I really should say once because that's what I'm going to check, that it gets called once. So I could pass this DTO into here, right? That's one way I could do this. And you can see this is valid now. But my method doesn't say that it passes in the correct parameter. It just says that it calls it once. So if I'm being really specific, I could say, I don't care which DTO gets passed in. I just care that a DTO gets called in. I'm going to attempt to explain that. And it's a little bit of a strange concept, but there's a difference. Let's do it this way. There's a difference between this and this syntax that we get here, which says it is any get, that's not right, it is any, oops, I'm going to say, oh gosh, my hands are cold today, get history DTO, okay, and what that will do, oh, I have to put a parentheses there, valid, no, that's not right, validate, oh, I need to construct that, okay. So the syntax here, the validate, this doesn't go in here. I guess I have this in verify, validate. I need another paren on there. A little sloppy on my typing, but good. So the difference between these two statements is this one says, I will be valid, right? I will assert, correctness to, this is valid if it calls validate passing this specific get history DTO. And this one's going to say, I don't care if you pass in anyone. Now, quite frankly, these should both work. Oh, I didn't turn on live unit testing. So let's put on live unit testing. I can do start, and it will start a session, and it's popping it up over here. But I'm going to drag that into another window, but we'll see all my unit tests start running when I do live unit tests. And let's see, where are... It's not coming in here yet. Doesn't even see this. Why doesn't it see this? Backend test, validate. Oh, here it comes. Okay, it was probably compiling and getting that. So test failed, which is fine. So, and we have a null exception. Value cannot be null. Now, I don't know the source of this. So point is, I'm going to come back to this in a minute here. I'm going to move this off screen. The point is my test ran, my test failed. And it's failing before it does the verify. And that's probably because there's something else in this class. And this is where things get a little tricky. Ideally, wouldn't we like to just do that? We'd like to know just that when I did this and I called get history, that this happened. And hopefully you can see from a unit testing perspective, that's what we care about. Did this happen? Now my guess is that there's something else I need to set up, because the way this test works is it's calling get history, and get history is going to continue on. So this probably worked. It probably said, oh yeah, I called that with this thing. But what probably happens is that it got down to here, more likely here. It probably called this mock and got episodes, but this history is probably blank. And it's probably throwing a null reference exception somewhere in here. That's my guess. And we can fix that. So what we want to do is we want to set up just enough code to make this test pass and not think about anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to debug this. Can I debug it from here? Let's put a breakpoint in right here. And I think I can debug this like that. So let's go starting up our debugger here. And while we're doing this, let's take a minute to say, I don't know what you guys are doing this evening, but if you're around this evening, if you live in the Philly area, you've already signed up, you want to go to the Blazor Roadshow. Blazor Roadshow is going to be really cool. Let me just go to that real quick. Blazor Roadshow. It's Carl Franklin's Blazor Roadshow. You can come in Malvern, the Philly office of Microsoft, the MTC in Malvern. Carl Franklin's doing the Blazor Roadshow. The Blazor Roadshow is going to be great. It's going to be Carl Franklin here teaching us all about Blazor, sponsored by DevExpress. Now, if you do not have a ticket for this and you're watching this live and you think, well, hey, I've got time around 6 o'clock and I still want to watch this, you can go to either mixer.com/philly.net. Is it philly.net? I spelled it wrong. This is the Mixer channel for philly.net, and they'll be showing that. Oh, they're hosting me. Look at that. Oh, that's so cool. I'm actually on here. That's a little redundant, right? Contrived Deck says, I was at the Boston event on Monday. Carl shows some great tips straight from Steve Sanderson. Thank you. Well, that's so cool that you were actually at this event. We've got like someone who's saying that, yeah, it was great. That's really cool. I was not expecting that. So here's what you can get that's even a bonus. Contrived X. Oh, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Contrived X is probably the way you say that. I could be wrong about that. So even better than going to philly.net, which is cool, go to the Dev Talk Show on Mixer or on Twitch, or you can go to video.thedevtalkshow and see it on YouTube. You can go here. They're hosting me as well, so this is getting confusing, probably. But on the Dev Talk Show, I'm going to close this so it's not too confusing, and I'll put it in here. Mixer, YouTube, or Twitch, the Dev Talk Show. And we are going to have Carl Franklin as a guest on the Dev Talk Show immediately afterwards. So he's going to do the Blazor Roadshow. He's going to talk for a few hours. Then he's kind enough to come downstairs to our studio for the Dev Talk Show, and he's going to talk to Rich Ross and Chris Gomez and myself, and we're going to interview him and ask him questions about it. So hopefully he'll answer some questions from the audience, and if you have questions, you can put them in on the on those streams. You can ask questions to us, and we can ask questions to Carl. So we're basically going to offer something, even if you've already seen the Blazor Roadshow, which only a few people have because it's been to Boston and New York so far. Check it out. Wow, I've gone on a little long there. I hope that was a lot or enough information. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Back in my code, we know we have an exception. So, I'm going to go in here. I put the breakpoint on the wrong one here. Let's go into get history. And my guess is that this works. And my guess is that this mock validate should work fine. And then this is going to work. Oh, value cannot be null parameter source. Wait, what? Messages is null. Oh, okay. I know what the problem here is. So what I did, and I created this messages class, and I probably forgot to put in the constructor, it says new list of string. Oh, wait. Hang on a second. This, I didn't check to see that results was empty, but so results is probably not coming back. The mock doesn't know. That's what it is, right? This validate method has to return a result, right? It has to return, no, sorry, it has to return, hang on. Let's look at that again. Did I get that confused here? Let's try that again. Debug all. So the mock, here's the thing, right? The mock doesn't actually return anything, or will return null, I guess. So let's go down into here and see that when I returned this, okay, what I got back is null, right? It returned, validate returns null, and it overrides messages, of course. Okay, got it. I didn't add a range of messages that were null. I basically set messages to be, yes, I'm setting this thing and it's overriding the fact that it's null. Okay, so there's a couple different ways I could change that. This is probably not the way I normally do things. I wrote this code kind of quickly. I could probably do like, I don't know, add range might also be, I wonder what add range does if you give it a null. Anybody know what happens at add range does if I give it a null? I could try this, because I want to basically take these messages and add them onto here. Let's find out if that works, because I'm getting a little bit sidetracked from my goal here of showing how to test these things, but I will come back in a sec. Oh, you know what happened? My live unit testing is paused. What? So now I don't get the icon on here on get history to do the test anymore. And it's probably because I like crap the thing out in the middle. So I'm going to restart that session and see if it sort of deals with that again. And I want to get a little further than I am now. So what I can show here in any case, I'm not getting that icon there. Do I have to do start? Should be started. There's a setting. Am I having a compilation failure? Let's see. I can also go to my unit test explorer. So this is another way to run tests. There's a couple ways to do it. Where is it? Test explorer, maybe? Test explorer. View, I just saw it there too. View test explorer. Okay, let's show that thing. Here's my test explorer. And if I go to, what's this blue mean? I don't know. Get history tests. And I'm going to try to debug this. You know what? I don't have a breakpoint in here anymore. Where did my breakpoint go? What did I do? Like something got messed up. Is it okay? Good. Well, whatever. I got that test running, and let's see if that add range. No, see, it doesn't like value to be null. So the point is, how do we fix that? What we want to do is we want to add some behavior. They're called mocks for a reason. I can mock out the behavior of it. I can ask it to do certain things. Okay. Sorry. So what I'm going to do now, could you try enumerable empty string? Yeah, I could, but I guess I want to show this anyway. So I was going to try to come at this from a different perspective. But what I want to do is I want to tell my validator that when you're done, before you run, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say, I want to do my get history DTO validator. And I'm going to call setup on it. And with setup, I say, I want to set up, and which method do I want to do? Nice lambda for this stuff. I want to set up the validate method, okay? And again, I'm going to use this it is any, okay? Because I don't care what gets passed to it, but I want to say when that gets called, returns, and I'll say new list of, what are these things called? Messages. I think it's called message. Probably have to add like a using for that. Yeah. That's not right. That's not right. What does this thing return? Messages is a, oh, it's a list of strings. Sorry. A list of strings. Okay. And now, no matter what happens from this validator, oh, and my test is passing already, so that automatic unit testing kicked in. What happens is it will create this blank, sort of empty string, and that will satisfy this method. So not this method, this property setter here. So the tricky part about these kind of tests is I have to satisfy those kind of, say, constraints, for lack of a better term. You can't have things that are failing because they expect your mock to actually do something. Now, it's cool. It sort of takes a little getting used to because you don't really care what it does. And I basically just say return a set of messages, okay? And so what I can do now to demonstrate this a little bit here is, this is even better case. And let's just leave this test like this for now. I'm going to copy this test. It might not be perfect, but in the interest of time, I want to move on and show, well, what I really want to do is I want to test this scenario. I'm jumping past my second scenario, but that's okay. I want to say if the results of validation fail, does it return success is false, right? So now what I want to do is I'm going to take this list of strings. I'm going to say var messages equals new list of strings, okay? And I'm going to tell it to return my specific list of messages. Okay, and let's see, wait. So I want to call this test returns success equals, this is really bad, return success equals false when validation fails, something like that. And this is probably not a good test name, but what I'm trying to say is when the validator fails, does it return the result? Does it return, if you look over here, if validation has messages, I should be done right there. I don't continue on, and I'm going to return success equals false. So again, we can come back to naming in a bit. Let's basically look and say, I don't care that the validator gets called anymore. Okay, but what I care is, after this happens, I'm going to get my var result equals, and I'm going to say assert false, okay, and I'm going to say result dot success. Okay, now we're going to do this. This should, oh, that passed result. Okay, yeah. So I didn't pass in a bad message into this thing yet. So let's just say messages dot add, and I'm going to say failed validation, whatever that message is. And now, why did it pass when, I just want to check something here. Result success equals false, otherwise, all right, you know what happens is that result probably defaults to 6. I thought usually I take these objects and I make them default to false by default. But I didn't in this case. So I know this might seem odd, but what I like to do is say success equals false. Oops, success equals false. I know usually we default things to true. I like in these result objects to say, like, if something goes wrong, Space Shot says I'm demoing a new strategy called green refactor. Yeah, exactly. So I like these things to be false sort of by default, because I want to say if something was to go wrong for whatever reason, I have to explicitly say this thing was successful. And so now let's try that again. And now, oh man, this thing's making me look crazy here. Get history validator, set up returns messages, get history DTO, and then I call it get history, and this thing should even return. So let's try something else. Let's set up that the messages. See, now it's possible that my code is written wrong. I don't know. So maybe these unit tests are correct and my code is written poorly. So I would want to write a test that says, so what's supposed to happen is if there's any messages, it should return them. Okay. So let's write another test and say, returns validation messages, if any. Okay, so let's get rid of this. This isn't helping at all. Okay, and so, so now what I want to say is assert contains, and I'm going to say result dot messages, and I think the message I want to contain has to go first, and I'm going to say failed validation. I think that's the way I write that. So what I'm looking to see is, did it return? And that failed. Okay, now let's put this back in, and it passes. Okay, good. So I'm doing something right here. So basically what this says is, if I have a message, it returns it. And that's good. And again, I had to do that. The only way to do that is to mock out this validator and say, return a message. Now, how would I have done this without mocking? I think it's important to take a step back and say, if I didn't have mocking, how would I do this? And what I'd have to do is I'd have to pass in to the validator. I'd have to like create criteria with invalid data, right? Then I'd have to call the validator, right, and get the right results back from it. Now, I'm doing a really simple scenario here. If my validation criteria is complicated and stuff like that, I don't want to be thinking about like what to do with. Sorry, I'm just looking in here, some of this stuff here. I don't want to think about like, well, how does this validation work? And like, what do I need to pass into it? I don't want to deal with any of that. What I really want to do is just mock it and say, right now, because this test says if there's a message, it has to be there. There has to be a validation message. So I'm adding it, and I'm going to set it up so that it returns it. I hope that makes sense, because I kind of explained it pretty quickly. But now it's going to return that. And so I can also, I usually do tests in both directions, so to speak. So I'm going to write a test that says returns no validation messages when none exist, or something like that, right? So in this case, of course, I have no more messages. I just deleted my message. This thing should fail. That's okay. But now I should say assert, and hopefully there's like an empty result.messages. Okay, so that's working good. Okay, great. So that's working good, but I still have a problem with my success. So return success equals false when validation fails. And it didn't seem to be working, right? So let's do another test. Let's flip that over. I always do tests for both sides of this thing. So I'll say return success equals true when, well, this is gonna be a little tricky because I haven't gotten far. All is well, right? When everything works, it should return true. And so in this case, This one should say assert true, and it's not. Okay, now that could be, there could be reasons for that. Again, I'm live coding this. I hadn't really practiced this or anything like that. So this is kind of what you run into sometimes when you're doing this thing. A little back and forth, but I really rushed right into this thing. So this thing does return true. Returns success equals false when validation fails. And in this case, see, I put this fail message in there and it works, but that still makes me feel, is this written wrong? Returning the messages, get history, assert false, result.success. So if I don't have this in here, then success should be true, right? So I'm going to debug it because I'm not sure what's going on there. That's weird. And sometimes it's just a question of not understanding my own logic or whatever, but you know, it really helps you work through the logic and sort of make sure that it's all correct. And unit testing is just like, you know, I'm really going to bulletproof my code here. So if I do this, there should be a message that comes out of that. Oh, messages is empty. What? Oh, okay, I forgot to add that messages thing into here. Okay, so messages is empty. Let's find out what happens when messages is empty. Messages is empty, and it comes down to here. Oh, I know why. Okay, so here's a mistake in my code. Here's a mistake in my code. This is great. Unit testing just helped me. Perfect scenario. So remember, I defaulted success to false up in the code earlier. I went back and changed that. And so I've got this code that says, well, I'll explicitly set success to false if something happens in here. But what I never did is explicitly set results success equals true. Okay. Now some people would say that that's the way it should be. Maybe I shouldn't default this thing to false. I'm not really sure about that. But if I say something like results.success, I could have some code in here that says when I get to the end, success is true. This is one way I could do it. And there's a variety of ways to do this, right? And now if I do that, I think we'll find that this test is good because success is not false. And when I put my message back in there, success equals true. And so unit testing here actually is helping me make my code correct and getting it all in working order. So that worked out really well. An unexpected, unplanned mistake in my code. Perfect. So then it returns success, and I don't know if this test is really valid yet. I want to comment this one out. I'm not really sure that's valid. And returns validation messages if there are any, and returns no validation messages if there are not. Okay? So these are working good. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to this point where the question was asked earlier. I think Space Shot was asking, what am I really testing, right? What I'm really testing is single responsibility. This get history method has a job to do. Its job is to follow the flow that I've identified in here and do things properly, right? So the next thing I would do is I'm going to test does get episodes work, and then I can test these other ones, and I'm going to try to do those quickly and see if I can get through those. But the point is, what I don't want to test is does this validate method work, right? There's already a test for that. So when I test this, all I care is did it get called and did it get these parameters? And my mock will handle that for me. My mock will say, yeah, I was called with its verify method, and I can call to make sure that it got the right parameters. I don't care what it does. And so in this case, I want to test this next set of logic. If there are messages, then return false, or success is false. And if there aren't, return, keep moving. And the only way to test that without mock would really be to double test validate. I'd have to write code in here that would be valid or not valid. And I don't want to do that in this case. That's sort of the beauty of mocking. So let's go on, and our next thing should say, does it call get episodes? And so let's go over here, and I'll say, now there's some other ways to do this, by the way. You know what? I'm going to do a little bit more. I think I'm going to keep going with this. Let's do, I don't want to have to copy and paste this code each time, by the way. So I'm going to say calls, what does it call? It's going to call the data service get episodes. Calls data service get episodes. And I'm naming these sort of poorly, but I'm going to come back to that. So by the way, this stuff's getting a little annoying, right? We shouldn't have to do this in every one of these things. One thing I can do is I can come up here and create a constructor. Okay. And I'm going to put this stuff in the constructor. I'm going to move them out. And I like to use underscores. Okay, underscore there. Okay, and let's just put my underscores in here. And now, if I go down to my bottom case, now I'd have to obviously clean up these other ones. I can get rid of this. I can get rid of that, but I don't have, I forgot to make the system under test is this thing needs to go up here too. And I'll just say, okay, what I want to do essentially with this stuff, will the constructor be invoked per unit test or once per test session? Bruno, thank you. That is a great question, which I honestly would not have thought to answer if you hadn't asked it, because I know the answer, right? And I don't always think about these things. So different frameworks handle things differently. And this is where, we want to be careful. I said it originally, it doesn't matter if you use mock or some other framework in its place, but the frameworks do behave differently. Mock, MOQ, the framework I'm using, calls the constructor once per test. And so each time those mocks will be created from scratch, right? And it will have all new sort of like clean data for every one of them. But different frameworks behave differently. So you want to sort of think about that a little bit. So I'm just kind of cleaning this up so these will work. I'm not going to clean up these other tests right now. Now we also know that this, let's just keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to say calls data service. So now what I want to do is I'm going to leave this out and I'm going to say data, what's it called? Episode data service dot verify. And I'm going to say ds is my data service, ds dot get episodes. And I'm going to say it is any, you know what? I can actually make sure. Another way to do this is calls data service get episodes with correct arguments. And the correct arguments would be this, DTO. And I'm going to say times once. Oops. Times once. I believe this is the right parameter. And let's see, my test failed. And that is because messages, because I have this in here, right? Now I have a failed validation message, which is good, okay? Because this is what I want to have happen in that case. But you can sort of see the way the logic is starting to work, okay? So now the next thing I could do, and this is all the kind of logic I want to test in here. It gets a little complicated, but I would say, how about this? Does not call data service if validation messages, if validation fails. How about that, right? And these are all these sort of like thinking about these scenarios. Now in this case, as soon as I add the message in there, it's going to fail, and that's fine. But what I want to do is say times never. And now it never calls the data service if the validation fails, right? It doesn't move on, okay? And we have that. Now the next one I want to show, and the last one I'm going to show today, is how to deal with this loop scenario and the episode history converter. So I'm going to create, let's see, let's sort of do this, sort of copying some of this stuff because I'm cheating, and I'm going to say calls converter never if no data exists, right? I don't know, maybe not the best name for tests. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have no messages here, but now I want to mock my data service. My data service needs to return something. So I'm going to set it up. I'm going to say data service setup dot ds goes to ds get episodes, and I'll pass in, I can pass in the same thing here. I don't really care what the parameters are because I don't want to have to think about setting all that stuff up, right? But what I want to say is returns, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, so it's supposed to return a, what does it return? It returns the history is an iQueryable of episodes, okay? So I think the easiest way to do that is I'm going to say var data equals new list of episode. I think that's correct. Okay, and then I'm going to sort of say returns data as, where's as queryable? Do I need a link to do that? As queryable. Is that a method? I think I need to add, like, let's see if it's smart enough to figure that out. Using system.link. Cool, right? So now it's going to return this queryable, which will be empty. Okay. And let's see. So I'm going to call get history DTO. I guess I need that DTO anyway. This is a little sloppy. Calls that. And what I want to do is it calls. So now what I want to do is call the episode history converter. And I'm going to verify that the converter DTO, and I don't care what results it's going to try to convert, right? What object does it have? Well, first of all, it's not going to have any because this thing doesn't return anything. But let's just say it is any. Oh, I got to be all type. And then what I want to do is see if you guys have any questions out there because maybe this doesn't make sense. I'm going to try to get this cleaned up a little bit here. Oh, not get history TTO, sorry, episode. Any episode. So the converter takes an episode, and it's failing because I still says convert once, and I'm going to say times.never, and my test should pass. So what that tells me, right, so let's look at this again. I've set up my episode data service to return an empty list, or no results, okay? And I've set up my validator to return basically an empty list, so I don't get null reference exceptions, okay? And then I call it, I say get history, and then I want to make sure that it never, and what should happen is it never goes into this loop, and therefore it never calls the get history converter, okay? Now I can keep going with the tests and things like that. What I usually do in loops, though, is I tend to write, I don't know, I'm not sure the best way to test these loops, right? So I'm going to say, I'll explain it in a sec. Calls converter once for single result, something like that. Okay, I'm going to say times once. What I like to try to do is test boundary conditions. So let's say 0 is a condition, 1 is a condition, and in this case, I'll say data.add, I'll say new episode. So as long as it has, oh, come on, new episode. As long as it has some data in there, it will call the converter. Okay, now we don't care how the converter works. It's mocked out. I don't care what it does. So I know it called it once. And then I like to call one more version of this thing just to make sure that like the looping works, I guess. I just feel like this is the right way to do it. I'll say for each result. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'm going to say times exactly, and I'd love to know if this is the right way to do this. I don't know, but I'm going to say data dot count. Now, can I do that on a Yeah, data.count. Okay, I want to call it for every episode, and of course that's going to work because it worked on once. But then I'm just going to go ahead and just add in, like, I don't know, let's just say that. Doesn't matter what I put in there, it should always work. And this is probably a lame way to do that. But the point is, what I've tested is, does this logic work? Does this logic work here? Is the loop working? So I'm looping through either 0 or maybe a single item or maybe a bunch of items, and it should just call this thing every time. And that's about an hour. Time goes fast. The show goes quickly. The point I wanted to show here is that what am I testing with these things? So it's pretty easy to mock these things out. These frameworks make it pretty easy to say something like, let's go up to the top, let's go to here, that, and maybe this will be a little bit of a review. I can create a mock of an object that is a dependency, and I inject that in my constructor of the object that I want to test. I don't care that any of these things work or how they work because they've already been tested by other unit tests on them. But I do need to deal with some facts that sometimes they return values. And if that value is null, it could get in the way of other parts of my code. So we often set up to return like empty lists or things like that. When I want a test that's dependent upon the results, I can easily sort of mock it out so that it returns the results I want to do to set up tests. I can run my asserts on them, or I can run my, so I've setup and I've got, where was it? Verify. Verify is the other thing that we can use in here. If this is all making sense, by the way, and you're watching this, please subscribe to my, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could subscribe, I appreciate it. If you're watching this in the archive. If you're watching it live, the archive for this show and other shows is on youtube.com/SwamiStreams. And if you are watching it live on Mixer or Twitch, follow me. I appreciate it. I appreciate you sticking around and giving me some time. Bruno, I appreciate, and Space Shot, I appreciate you guys talking about things. I should check this code in. I'm probably on the next week's show. I think what I'm going to do is continue with some of this testing and maybe renaming some of this code and maybe organizing this code. I'll probably continue at unit testing, but let's see. Added unit tests for Orchestrator. And hopefully I answered some of the questions. The big question there is, what are we unit testing when we do these kind of things? We're testing the control flow, the control logic of the orchestrator, and that's it. I think we're about an hour, maybe a couple minutes over, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for sticking around and joining me, and I hope to see you guys tonight on the Dev Talk Show, where we'll be interviewing Carl Franklin, and that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody.